Why did she always choose the corner rack, the one with both exits in view? Nobody ever asked, nobody ever noticed. At Forward Operating Base Falcon, you could disappear if you wanted to. And for 2 quiet weeks, Staff Sergeant Zara Hayes did exactly that. She was the night shift nurse, the one who worked when the rest of the base slept, a name on the roster, a shadow in the ward, the kind of soldier people saw every day but never really looked at. The heat in western Iraq pressed down like punishment. When the Chinook dropped her off that afternoon, the air rolled through the landing zone in thick, choking waves. Dust clung to her uniform, her skin, even her eyelashes. The entire compound shimmered in pale gold, blast walls, guard towers, and that faint hum of diesel generators that never stopped. Zara walked through it all like she'd done this 1,000 times before. Maybe she had, maybe she hadn't, no one could tell. At the processing station, a tired sergeant flipped through her file without even meeting her eyes. Hayes Zara, Staff Sergeant, 68 Whiskey, Night Shift Medical, Barracks Echo, Rack 12. Chief Thompson runs your facility, briefing at 1900, try not to get blown up your first week. His tone was casual, almost joking, but she didn't smile, just took the access card, nodded once and moved on. Inside the barracks, the air reeked of industrial cleaner fighting a losing battle against sweat and recycled air. Soldiers laughed somewhere down the hall, the kind of laughter born from exhaustion more than humor. Zara found her bunk near the wall, the perfect position for situational awareness. She placed her bag down with quiet deliberation. Every movement was calculated. Unpack, check gear, position medical tools, align boots under the bed, a habit, maybe, or maybe survival disguised as organization. On the small table beside her rack sat a single photograph. 5 people, blurred faces, hers the only one visible. 4 shadows erased, 1 woman remaining. She stared at it for a long second before sliding it under her notebook. Some memories didn't need daylight. By 1900, the desert heat had eased into darkness. The medical facility sat in the compound center, a squat, concrete block surrounded by sandbags and blast walls. Inside, the air buzzed with fluorescent light and the faint metallic scent of antiseptic. Monitors beeped steadily. Every sound felt louder in the silence. Chief Warrant Officer Daniel Thompson met her at the door, a man built from experience rather than muscle. His eyes carried the exhaustion of 15 years in combat medicine. Hayes' night shift runs 1900 to 0700. You monitor vitals, meds, and wound care. Documentation, inventory. Standard procedures unless we get casualties. Then you assist and stay clear unless directed. Understood. Yes, Chief. He studied her for a moment. You have deployment experience. Some rotations. Previous assignments included field medical support. Vague answer, he caught that, but he didn't press. Fair enough. Welcome to Falcon. Night shifts are usually quiet. He didn't know that quiet was sometimes the most dangerous sound of all. That first week, Zara moved through the ward like a ghost. She spoke softly, worked efficiently, and never complained. Soldiers came in with shrapnel wounds, dehydration, exhaustion. She stabilized them, charted vitals, changed dressings. No mistakes, no hesitation. And when she wasn't busy, she memorized everything: the building layout, the emergency exits, the generator locations. She told herself it was habit, leftover from a more chaotic past, but deep down she knew better. Once you've lived in chaos, you never really stop preparing for it. The day shift medics, Martinez, Foster, and Mitchell, barely noticed her. Martinez led with loud confidence, his voice always a little too sharp. Foster was young, brilliant, and quick to remind others of it. Mitchell kept quiet, but his silence held judgment. They treated her like a background figure, the nurse who took vitals while real medics handled trauma. Night shift must be easy, Martinez said once during a handover, grinning as he zipped his kit. Getting combat pay for babysitting sleeping patients while the rest of us do real medicine. Foster chuckled. I heard she came from some stateside hospital, probably never seen a real trauma case. Zara didn't answer, just kept charting vitals, the pen moving with calm precision. She'd heard worse, and she'd learned long ago that the loudest soldiers weren't always the most dangerous. But Thompson noticed. He watched how she positioned herself during care, never with her back to a door. How her hands moved like she'd performed the same motions in darker, less forgiving places. One night he found her reorganizing trauma kits, rearranging equipment in a way that wasn't regulation. Tourniquets packed for one-handed deployment. Hemostatic gauze arranged for use in low light. Each adjustment told a story. He raised an eyebrow. That's not standard configuration. Just optimizing efficiency, Chief. That's specialized tactical setup. Where'd you learn that? She met his gaze, her eyes unreadable. Previous assignment had unique requirements, some habits stick. He let it go, but something in him stayed curious. Falcon's routine lulled everyone into false security. The base was a fortress in the desert, blast walls, turrets, patrols. Nothing ever happened here, or at least not recently. Then came the Wednesday intelligence brief. Drone footage, unusual movements near the border, locals going silent. Analysts recommended enhanced security. Everyone nodded, checked the box, and went back to work. But when Zara read the summary posted on the bulletin board that night, she didn't shrug it off. Her pulse quickened. She walked the perimeter on her way to the ward, tracing distances between barriers, counting how many seconds it would take to reach the shelter from the treatment bay. She noted blind corners, weak walls, cover positions. She told herself it was just a mental exercise, something to keep her sharp. But deep down, she knew it was instinct. The part of her that never stopped calculating threat vectors even when the world pretended it was safe. That night the ward was quiet. A ranger recovering from chest surgery, 2 Marines with shrapnel wounds, a local interpreter nursing a fractured arm. The hum of machines filled the air like a lullaby. Zara moved between beds, checking IVs, adjusting oxygen lines, writing notes. She paused by the window. The desert stretched endless beyond the compound, a sea of darkness broken only by distant flickers, maybe heat lightning, maybe something else. She stared for a long time. Because somewhere in her gut, something whispered, it's coming. At 03:15, the first rocket hit. The fuel depot went up like a sun exploding in the night, fireball, shockwave, glass raining down. The ground trembled beneath her boots. Every alarm on base screamed at once. Zara's hands moved before thought. Chart down, IV checked, patients assessed. Emergency generator kicked in with a low growl, flooding the ward in red light. Outside, chaos. Boots pounding, shouts echoing, engines roaring to life. More explosions followed, methodical and precise. Whoever was attacking knew exactly where to hit: comms, fuel, power, perimeter. This wasn't harassment. This was coordination. Thompson burst through the doors, voice cutting through the noise. Hayes, evacuate ambulatory patients to the hardened shelter. Now, we've got casualties inbound in this facility, about to become critical terrain. No hesitation, she moved. 12 patients. 6 could walk, 3 needed assistance, and 3 were on life support. Every decision mattered. Every second counted. She started moving the mobile ones first, IV poles in hand, urging them toward the reinforced hallway that led to the shelter. Fire alarms blared overhead. The building shuddered with each distant impact. That's when Martinez and his day shift team stormed in, half-dressed, adrenaline surging. He took one look at her leading evacuation and snapped, "Get out of the way and let trained personnel handle this." Zara didn't look up. Currently moving non-critical patients to safety per Chief Thompson's orders. Ambulatory are almost clear. I don't need a status report from night shift, he shot back. Move your patients and stay in the shelter where you won't interfere. Another explosion rocked the facility. Ceiling dust rained down. One of the wounded groaned in panic. Zara's tone stayed level. Sergeant, arguing wastes time. We move now or they die. He didn't answer, just glared, the kind of glare people give when they don't know what else to do. But Chief Thompson saw the logic. Hayes, keep moving them. Martinez, coordinate trauma bays. We'll need every hand. Smoke began seeping through ventilation ducts. The metallic tang of dust and burning fuel coated the air. Outside, automatic fire cracked in steady bursts. The enemy was close, closer than anyone expected. Zara turned toward the ventilator unit, the Ranger's chest still rising and falling in sync with the machine. The display blinked low power. Battery backup, 75 minutes. She grabbed the cables, disconnected with practiced calm. Carter, you handle the ventilator. I'll manage IVs. We move together low and fast. The corpsman hesitated. You've done this before. Just move. They rolled the gurney through a hallway that now sounded like a war zone. Bullets pinged off outer walls. The facility shook. Zara's heartbeat stayed steady. She had done this before under fire in worse conditions. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. By the time they reached the shelter, 3 critical patients were stable again, alive because she refused to freeze. Outstanding work, Thompson said, breathless, but it's just starting. And he was right. Outside, the attack grew louder, closer, smarter. The night shift was over. The war shift had begun. Somewhere in the roar of distant gunfire, a thought flickered through her mind, calm, detached, terrifyingly certain. So this is how it comes back. The version of her she'd buried, the one who knew how to fight, how to kill, how to survive when the lights went out, was clawing its way back to the surface. And by dawn, everyone at Forward Operating Base Falcon would learn that the quietest person in the room was the one they should have feared all along. What makes a person switch from healer to fighter in a single breath? Maybe it isn't a choice at all. Maybe it's instinct, a muscle memory buried so deep it only wakes when the world starts burning. The medical ward shook again, not from a distant explosion this time, but from something close, too close. Glass shattered. The air turned heavy with dust and panic. Outside, voices yelled orders through the smoke, half of them human, half mechanical, radios, sirens, alarms blending into a single roar. Zara crouched beside the ventilator, checking oxygen flow with trembling fingers that didn't feel like hers. The emergency power light flickered. Diesel generators coughed. Somewhere above them, the sound of sustained gunfire rolled like thunder. Enemy inside the outer perimeter, a soldier screamed from the hallway. They're breaching south and west. Chief Thompson turned to his staff. Martinez, get triage ready. We'll have casualties in under 2 minutes. Hayes, keep those criticals stable. Foster, Mitchell, lockdown procedures now. Everyone moved, but not fast enough. Fear slows people down. Training is supposed to overcome it, but training only works if your hands remember what to do. Zara's hands remembered. She sealed an IV line, turned the valve, adjusted pressure, and thought 50 meters. That's how close they are. She could almost hear individual footfalls in the dark. Then came the first casualty, a corporal dragged in by 2 soldiers, his leg wrapped in a field dressing soaked through with arterial blood. Martinez took one look and shouted, "Thigh wound, tourniquet now." Zara was already there, kneeling, tightening the band. "Pulse weak, you need to go higher." He hesitated, then did exactly as she said. The bleeding slowed. For a second their eyes met. He didn't thank her, he didn't have to. More came, shrapnel wounds, burns. One man blind from the blast. The small medical bay transformed into a battlefield of its own, screaming blood, the stench of dust and cordite. Every sound, every movement folded into a rhythm Zara had known long ago. Chaos, triage, survival. She promised herself she was done with that rhythm, but tonight the music was back. Then the lights died completely. Not a flicker, total blackout. The emergency lamps tried to kick in, failed, then guttered out one by one until only the red exit signs glowed like fatting embers. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Silence filled the room, heavy, suffocating. And in that silence, something inside Zara shifted. 2 weeks she'd played the role, quiet nurse, invisible professional, someone who didn't belong in the conversations about real danger. 2 weeks pretending she was normal, but darkness doesn't ask for permission. It calls what it knows. She stood, walked through the ward by memory, each step measured. Her boots crunched over glass. She opened a wall locker she wasn't supposed to know about and reached inside. Metal met her hands, cold, familiar. The M4 carbine. 4 loaded magazines, tactical vest, plates, everything she'd hoped she'd never touch again. When she turned, Chief Thompson was staring, confusion and realization crossing his face at the same time. "Hayes, what are you doing?" She checked the chamber, slammed a mag, racked it once safety on. Her voice was calm, too calm. "Making sure our patients survive, Chief." His mouth opened, no words came. "Your medics know trauma," she continued, sliding the vest on. "But they don't know defense. Someone needs to keep the enemy out long enough for you to work. And you do." Zara met his eyes. For the first time in 2 weeks, she stopped hiding. "Yes, Chief, I really do." He didn't argue. He just nodded once, the kind of nod that means, "I don't understand this, but I believe it." Then gunfire ripped through the front entrance. Bullets chewed through the steel door, snapping off hinges. 2 fighters poured through the smoke, their silhouettes jerky and fast. Zara dropped to a knee, exhaled slow, and squeezed twice. 2 sharp bursts, controlled pairs. Both men fell before the echo faded. Nobody in the ward spoke. The second wave hit harder, windows shattered, rounds sparking off metal frames. Foster screamed as debris sliced her arm. Martinez shouted for suppression, but nobody had a plan. They'd trained for mass casualties, not firefights. Zara didn't shout, she just moved. Equipment racks turned into barricades, IV poles into cover. She swept debris aside to create firing lanes. Every motion precise, not frantic, not heroic, just professional. Martinez stumbled toward her, pistol in hand, eyes wide. "What the hell, Hayes? Put that down. You're a nurse, not infantry." She didn't even look at him. "In 30 seconds they'll breach again. Decide if you want to argue or help me stop them." "That's an order," he barked. She finally turned, eyes calm, expression unreadable. "Then court-martial me later." Another impact, another rush of shouting outside. Chief Thompson snapped, "Martinez, get your people to the shelter. Hayes, hold the entrance." "Chief, that's insane." "Move, that's an order." For once, Martinez obeyed. He and Foster grabbed the nearest patients and started hauling them toward the reinforced hallway. The noise was deafening, gunfire, screaming, the distant hum of rotors overhead. Zara took her position behind an overturned gurney. The hallway glowed faint red. Sweat slid down her temples. Her breathing slowed to something cold and mechanical. The door gave way. 3 shadows burst through. She didn't think, she calculated. First target, center mass. Second, crossfire angle. Third, partial cover. 3 bursts, 3 drops. Then silence again, broken only by the ringing in her ears. Thompson crawled beside her, face streaked with soot. "Jesus, Hayes." "Still holding," she said softly, "but they'll be back." He nodded, eyes darting toward the wounded. 2 criticals can't move, power's out, we're trapped here. "Then we hold." He didn't argue. Maybe he understood that tone, the one soldiers use when logic ends. Outside, more footsteps, the enemy regrouping, shouts in Arabic, orders barked. She could feel the pattern forming, flanking fire, pressure on windows, a new breach vector. She prepped for it without conscious thought. Mag check, 2 full, 1 half. She placed the half mag near her knee, ready to swap mid-contact. When the next volley came, she was already moving. Rounds tore through the doorway. Glass sprayed her arms, but she stayed low, adjusting angles, returning fire in controlled rhythm. One fighter fell, another retreated. Then a flashbang clinked across the floor. "Flash!" she yelled, turning away, eyes squeezed shut. The detonation turned the room white, concussive, but by the time the first enemy stepped through, she was already rolling to a new position. He hesitated just long enough for her to fire. The gunfire faded again. Smoke filled the space. The acrid burn of propellant coated her tongue. In the red emergency glow, she looked nothing like a nurse. The vest darkened with soot, the rifle steady against her shoulder, her eyes focused, calm, terrifying. The others in the shelter saw her silhouette and didn't recognize it. The quiet night nurse had vanished. What remained was something else. Someone else. The pause between waves stretched longer this time, a minute, maybe 2. Long enough for the sound of distant engines to fade in, long enough for breathing to slow. Martinez peeked out from the shelter doorway. His voice shook. "What's happening?" "Regroup," Zara replied. "They're testing us. Next one's coordinated." He hesitated, looked at her weapon, then at Thompson. "She's serious about this." Thompson's answer came in a low rasp. "She's the only reason we're alive right now. Do what she says." Martinez swallowed. "Then tell me what to do." She pointed toward the east windows. "Cover that side. Fire only when you see targets. Keep them distracted." Foster and Mitchell joined, pale but determined. Carter reappeared, rifle in hand. Where he got it, she didn't ask. Zara felt something rare, not command, not pride, just connection. People acting without ego because fear had stripped it away. The next attack came harder. Automatic bursts from 3 sides. Glass exploded inward. Martinez flinched but returned fire. Foster screamed something incoherent and emptied her magazine. Carter's shots were disciplined, precise. Zara called targets, shifting them like pieces on a board. Left window, 2 advancing, suppressed now. The base outside erupted in crossfire. Distant machine guns shouted orders. The heavy chop of helicopters trying to reposition. For 40 minutes they held, an eternity in combat time. Then just when they thought it might be over, a hollow whoosh tore through the night. The ceiling erupted. An RPG. Concrete dust filled the air. Debris rained down, setting fires that painted the ward orange. The second rocket hit lower, collapsing part of the western wall. Zara coughed through smoke, dragging a wounded medic away from falling debris. "Chief, we need to evacuate now. This building won't hold." Thompson's eyes watered from the dust. He saw the cracks splitting the ceiling and didn't argue. "We can't move the criticals." "Then they die when this roof caves in." Another blast cut her off. The world tilted, metal screamed. Somewhere a patient cried out. Zara grabbed her radio, already calculating routes. Eastern exit. 50 meters open ground to command center. We use smoke cover, move in pairs. That's our window. Martinez stared at her. "That's suicide." She looked back, voice steady. "So is staying." For the first time since the attack began, everyone believed her without question. Outside, the gunfire shifted, distant, frantic. The enemy was closing, trying to finish the job. Zara reloaded her final full magazine and took one long breath. Her voice softened, almost tender. "Chief, start the evac when I say. You'll have 90 seconds. I'll draw their fire." Carter's head snapped up. "You can't hold alone." "You won't be alone," he said before she could answer. Martinez and Foster stepped forward too, shaking but resolute. "We'll cover east. Just tell us when." Zara gave a small nod. "When the smoke pops." She pulled a canister from her vest, thumbed the pin. waited for the hiss, then threw it toward the breach. White fog billowed through the ward like ghostly surf. "Go," she whispered. And the world moved again. Wounded carried, boots pounding, shouts echoing through smoke. She turned toward the fire, rifle raised, and disappeared into the haze. Somewhere beyond that doorway, into the smoke and the darkness, the nurse who'd been invisible became what she'd always truly been. A protector. A weapon. A ghost from another war, reborn in this one. And for the men trying to take that facility, she was about to remind them that mercy and lethality can live inside the same pair of hands. What drives a healer to pick up a rifle and run toward the sound of gunfire? Maybe it's not duty or courage, maybe it's guilt. Guilt for every life she couldn't save. Guilt for knowing how to kill and pretending she'd forgotten. The eastern emergency door slammed open, and the desert night swallowed her. Smoke curled around her like fog on water, thick, choking, luminous in the firelight. Behind her, the medical ward burned. In front of her, shadows moved, fluid, disciplined, dangerous. Zara dropped to a crouch, scanning through the chaos. Her eyes adjusted fast, her body remembered faster. 10 meters ahead, movement, two silhouettes by the concrete barriers. They were reloading an RPG. Her heart didn't race, her breathing didn't change. One squeeze, two bursts. The man with the launcher dropped instantly. His partner spun in confusion, then fell. She moved before the bodies hit the ground. This wasn't adrenaline, it was muscle memory. The same movements that had once made her a legend in a unit that officially didn't exist. Back at the shelter, Chief Thompson's voice echoed faintly through the smoke, shouting orders. The wounded were moving slow, stumbling, terrified. They needed 90 seconds. She had to buy them that. Zara sprinted low along the blast wall, rifle steady. Her mind worked like a tactical map. Angles, distances, cover arcs. Every move had purpose. Every shot had weight. She reached the corner of a fuel container and froze. 3 more fighters, machine gun team, setting up to suppress the evacuation route. She couldn't let that happen. No time for hesitation. She shifted her stance, raised her M4 and fired through the muzzle flashes. The gunner collapsed backward. The assistant half-turned before the next shot found him. It was too easy. Too familiar. And that was the part that scared her most. Because a part of her liked the control, the clarity. When everything's chaos, the shooter decides who lives and who doesn't. That power was intoxicating, and she'd spent years trying to bury it. But tonight wasn't about her redemption. It was about survival. She ducked as return fire stitched the wall beside her. Stone splinters bit her cheek. She rolled left, crawled under broken fencing, then used the dark to shift positions again. The attackers shouted in Arabic, panicked now. They expected an easy kill. Instead, something was hunting them. Through the smoke, Zara saw flashes of movement, more hostiles closing in, spreading out, trying to flank. She whispered to herself, "Not this side, not tonight." Her gloved hand slid to her last full magazine. She checked it. 75 rounds left, maybe less. Enough. She climbed onto a sandbag wall, just high enough to see the field beyond. And for the first time, she saw the scope of it. Dozens of fighters in coordinated movement, using captured vehicles, suppressive arcs, radio chatter. This wasn't a raid. This was an attempt to erase Falcon Base completely. And she was one person in the middle of it. Back in the medical ward, Carter finished loading the last stretcher into the evacuation column. Smoke poured from ceiling cracks, the walls moaned with strain. "Chief, she's still out there," he shouted over the din. Thompson didn't look up from stabilizing a patient. "You think I don't know that?" He'd seen her face before she disappeared into the smoke, that cold, unshakable calm. He'd seen it once before, years ago, in Afghanistan, on the face of a SEAL corpsman who'd saved his life under fire. Different gender, same eyes. Same look of someone who doesn't expect to survive the night. Outside, gunfire raged, then silence, then gunfire again, closer this time. Martinez clutched his rifle. "She can't hold forever, we've got to go." Thompson nodded. "We move on her signal, no one gets left behind." They waited, hearts pounding, listening to the war outside shift like a living thing. Zara reached the broken wall overlooking the outer perimeter. Flames from the fuel depot painted the desert in violent golds and oranges. The air reeked of burning diesel. She crouched, eyes scanning for the next threat. Then voices, a whole squad moving along the east trench line. 8, maybe 10. They were trying to flank toward the command center, right across the evacuation route. If they made it there before her people crossed. No, she couldn't let that happen. She moved, fast, silent, low. Her boots barely disturbed the sand. She slid behind a half-collapsed barrier and lined up her sights. But then she hesitated. They were close enough now for her to see their faces, young, exhausted, maybe barely trained. She'd been taught to see enemies as targets, but medicine had changed that. She saw pulse points, wounds waiting to happen, lives even if they were on the wrong side. And still she fired. Controlled bursts, short, merciful. She didn't miss. The last man fell trying to drag his comrade away. The silence afterward was deafening. Zara's hands trembled. She lowered the rifle. For a moment she wasn't in Iraq. She was somewhere else, a jungle maybe, or a valley in another country that doesn't exist on maps. A flashback, blood, radio static, the voice of a teammate screaming before the comms cut. She shook her head hard. Not now. Her breathing steadied. She checked the horizon. The night was shifting again, engines approaching. Not enemy trucks. Helicopters. Distant, low-frequency thunder rolling through the smoke. But it wasn't close enough yet. She still had to hold. At the medical shelter, the air had become suffocating. The wounded groaned under morphine. Thompson knelt beside Carter, checking vitals with trembling hands. Martinez stood guard near the door, his confidence stripped down to something raw and honest. Then they heard it, 3 rapid gunshots evenly spaced, not random, not panic. A signal. Thompson looked up. That's her. Martinez blinked. You sure? He nodded. Go, that's the window. Smoke grenades hissed, filling the corridor with white clouds. One by one, they began moving, stretcher teams first, ambulatory soldiers next. Carter led the way, covering the flanks. The open ground between the shelter and command center glowed faint from firelight, a killing field. But at least now it wasn't empty. It was covered by one woman's rifle. Zara shifted positions again, the M4's barrel hot against her glove. Her last magazine was half empty. Her left knee throbbed from impact she hadn't noticed earlier, but she couldn't stop. She saw them, her people, emerging through the smoke, stumbling across open ground in 2s and 3s. Her heart clenched. For everyone that made it past the halfway point, she exhaled relief like a prayer. A flash in her peripheral vision, another RPG team. She swung, fired. The round missed high. The launcher fired. The rocket streaked toward the medical facility. She didn't think, didn't breathe, just shot again. This time she hit. The round detonated mid-flight, lighting the night in a ball of fire that knocked her backward. Her ears rang. Her weapon clattered beside her. She blinked once, twice, then grabbed the rifle again, vision spinning. Still alive, still moving. The attack was breaking. She could hear the panic, enemy radio chatter turning frantic. They hadn't expected resistance. They hadn't expected her. She pushed herself upright, gasping. The smoke from the explosions twisted in the wind, revealing fragments of the battlefield, fallen fighters, burning debris, the silhouettes of her people reaching safety. She smiled faintly. "Good," she whispered, "keep going." But then came the click. The sound she dreaded most. Empty. Her last magazine was dry. Zara stared at the rifle like she could will it to reload itself. Then she heard it, footsteps behind her. She turned. A fighter had circled around, AK raised, close enough to see her face. The gunfire that followed wasn't hers. He fired first. The round snapped past her shoulder. She lunged forward, too close for a clean shot. The two collided, weapons clattering to the dirt. He was bigger, stronger, screaming in a language she didn't understand. She fought without sound, precision over power, speed over strength. Knee strike, elbow, knife from her vest. A flash of silver, a breathless struggle. Then silence again. Zara staggered back, chest heaving, staring at the man lying still at her feet. The sand around them was dark. She closed her eyes for a second, just a second. Because she didn't want to see what she'd become again. And then salvation sounded like thunder. The deep, rhythmic chop of Apache rotors. Gunships inbound. The radio on her shoulder crackled to life with a familiar voice, strained, breathless. Falcon actual to all units, air support online. Mark friendlies, stay low. She laughed once, a small, disbelieving sound. Relief and exhaustion tangled in her chest. Pulling an IR strobe from her pocket, she flicked it on, clipping it to her vest. The gunship saw her instantly. One flare blinked back in acknowledgement. Seconds later, the night exploded. 30 chain guns thundered, lighting the desert in strobe flashes of destruction. Enemy fighters scattered, some running, others cut down mid-step. The storm of fire was mechanical, merciless and precise. Zara sank behind a sandbag wall, covering her head as dust and shockwaves washed over her. She didn't cheer, she didn't cry. She just sat there breathing, watching the sky rain fire. When the last burst faded, silence returned, the heavy, fragile kind that follows survival. Her rifle hung empty, her vest was torn, her body trembled. But she was alive. And so were they. When she walked back through the smoke toward the ruined medical facility, every eye turned. Carter was there, waiting at the entrance, covered in soot, rifle still in hand. He looked at her like he was seeing something mythic, something impossible. "Everyone made it out," he said quietly, "all of them." Zara nodded, too tired for words. Chief Thompson appeared next, eyes red, voice low. "You bought us time, Hayes. You saved the whole damn base." She didn't answer, just looked past him at the horizon where the first traces of dawn bled into the sky. Behind her, Martinez, Foster, Mitchell, the ones who'd mocked her, stood speechless. There was fear in their eyes still, but also something else. Respect, maybe awe. Because they'd all seen it. The quiet night nurse who became something else when the lights went out. And none of them would ever look at her the same way again. The sun broke over Falcon Base, painting the smoke gold. Helicopters circled, medics ran triage, commands shouted through radios. And Zara Hayes stood among it all, silent, still, empty-handed. She'd done what she had to do. But she knew this truth too well. Survival isn't victory. It's just proof you have to live with what you've done. How do you go back to being a nurse after a night like that? How do you wash blood off your hands when some of it was spilled by your own doing? By morning, forward operating base Falcon looked like a scar carved into the desert. The sun rose over ruins, twisted metal, smoking craters, the smell of fuel and cordite drifting through heat waves. The attack had lasted 4 hours. It had felt like a lifetime. Medics moved through debris with the mechanical rhythm of exhaustion. Soldiers dragged hoses, extinguishing what was left of the fires. Engineers marked damaged structures with red paint. The ground was littered with spent casings and silence. Zara sat on a broken wall outside the medical facility, head bowed, helmet off, rifle across her knees, though she wasn't sure why she still held it. Her hands shook, not from fear now, but from the weight of stillness after too much noise. She could feel the aftermath settling, the strange, hollow quiet that always follows survival. Carter approached slowly, his own uniform streaked with soot. He handed her a canteen. "You should drink," he said. She nodded but didn't. "How many casualties?" 28 wounded, he replied, voice low. "No KIA from our side, not one." That number hung in the air between them, like something unreal. She looked up at the black smoke rising from the distance. "And them?" He hesitated. "They stopped counting at 30. Zara exhaled, not relief, not sorrow, just breath leaving a body that wasn't sure it deserved to keep breathing. "You did what you had to do," Carter said softly. She didn't answer, because part of her still didn't know if she believed that. Inside the compound, command had turned chaos into routine. Officers huddled around maps and radio reports. Engineers patched comms. Helicopters ferried wounded to evacuation zones. And in the middle of it all, Colonel Jennifer Marshall, Falcon's base commander, stood composed and sharp-eyed despite the exhaustion written across her face. When she saw Zara walk in, she paused mid-briefing. "Staff Sergeant Hayes," she said carefully, "we'll need to have a conversation about last night." Her tone wasn't anger. It was curiosity laced with command, the kind that says, "I don't know what you are, but I'm going to find out." Zara nodded once. "Understood, ma'am." "Chief Thompson, you'll sit in as witness." "Yes, ma'am." They moved into the temporary command post, walls lined with radios and maps still pinned with enemy approach vectors. Zara stood at attention while Marshall reviewed a tablet. "According to reports," the colonel began, "you engaged multiple hostiles while facilitating medical evacuation under direct fire. Killed or neutralized no less than 12 enemy combatants, disrupted an RPG team, and prevented further casualties. Is that accurate?" Zara's voice was steady. "I acted to defend the facility and the wounded, ma'am." "That's not what I asked." She hesitated. "Yes, ma'am, it's accurate." Marshall looked up. "Then perhaps you can explain something. Your personnel file lists standard combat medic training, no advanced tactical instruction, no record of special operations attachments, no qualifications beyond standard issue. So tell me, Sergeant, where the hell did you learn to fight like that?" Zara didn't flinch. "Classified training, ma'am." "Classified?" Marshall arched an eyebrow. "Under whose authority?" Before Zara could answer, the door opened behind her. A man in civilian clothes stepped in, calm, pressed shirt, ID clipped to his belt. He carried himself with the quiet authority of someone used to being allowed anywhere. "Colonel Marshall," he said. "Robert Chen, Defense Intelligence Agency. I think I can provide context." The colonel frowned. "You're late." "Traffic," Chen said dryly, then turned to Zara. "Hello again, Staff Sergeant." Zara's jaw tightened. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Few people ever do," he replied. He turned to Marshall. "I can confirm that Sergeant Hayes participated in classified operations with Joint Special Operations elements between 2015 and 2021, embedded as combat medical support. Locations redacted. Missions also redacted." Marshall crossed her arms. "She's one of yours." "Not anymore," Chen said simply. "She transferred to conventional service 18 months ago under a voluntary transition program. The details are restricted, but I can summarize. She's one of 15 medics trained under a now-discontinued Tier 1 combat medical initiative. 6 years of deployments, 163 missions. Highest recorded casualty survival rate in program history." The colonel stared. "And you're telling me you just dropped her into my base without so much as a whisper?" Operators need decompression assignments, Chen replied. Falcon was considered low risk. Marshall gave a humorless laugh. Low risk. She gestured toward the burning compound visible through the window. You have an interesting definition of that. Zara stood silent, gaze fixed on the wall. Chen continued. Her deployment was meant to be anonymous. No special treatment, no exposure. She agreed not to reveal her background unless the situation required it. He glanced at her. I'd say last night qualified. Marshall exhaled slowly. So what happens now? That's up to her, Chen said. She's fulfilled her transition terms. She can request reassignment back to her original unit or stay and complete her deployment here as standard medical staff. Zara finally spoke. Her voice was quiet even. I'd like to stay. Both officers looked at her. Finish my deployment, she added. Keep working medical, teach what I know. Maybe next time they don't need someone like me to save them. Chen studied her face for a moment, then nodded. I'll make the arrangements. Marshall sat back, crossing her arms. No disciplinary action from me. You saved lives, but I can't pretend this doesn't change things. My personnel just discovered their night nurse was a special operations asset. You think they'll ever see you the same way again? I don't expect them to, Zara said softly. I just expect them to be better because of it. The meeting ended with signatures and silence. Chen left with a briefcase full of secrets, and Colonel Marshall turned back to her maps. Thompson lingered. You sure you want to stay? He asked. Zara gave him a tired half-smile. It's either this or go back to the shadows, and I've had enough of those. He nodded slowly. Then we rebuild together. She looked back toward the burned-out facility. We'll need new walls. He smiled faintly, and new medics. Then we start teaching. That evening, Falcon Base glowed under floodlights as reconstruction began. Bulldozers cleared debris. Engineers welded new supports. The rhythm of normalcy tried to return, one sound at a time. Zara spent the night shift, what was left of it reorganizing supplies. Carter worked beside her, wrapping new bandages, checking IV stocks. At some point he said, You know, Martinez wants to apologize. Does he? Yeah, he's been packing for hours. She sighed, then let him. A minute later, Martinez appeared at the doorway, helmet under his arm, expression awkward. Hayes. Sergeant. He shifted, searching for words that didn't sound small. I was wrong about you, completely, and I'm sorry. She kept working, hands steady. Apology accepted. He hesitated. If there's anything I can do. She looked up, eyes sharp but not unkind. You can start by treating every medic, every nurse, every night shift tech with the same respect you give your own. You don't know what any of them have done or what they're capable of. He nodded, swallowing hard. Fair point. She turned back to her work. And if you really want to help learn, next time something like this happens, you won't need me to do what you already can. Martinez smiled faintly. Would you teach us? Zara paused, then said simply, That I can do. Over the next few weeks, Falcon transformed. The scars of the attack became lessons, reinforced bunkers, reorganized shelters, new drills. Zara designed tactical medicine modules that integrated field survival with combat triage. Foster, Mitchell, Carter, they became her students, her team. They practiced under simulated fire, learned to treat while bullets cracked overhead, learned that courage wasn't noise, it was precision. And slowly, the base's culture changed. Night shift wasn't a punishment anymore. It was a privilege. Soldiers began saluting her without hesitation. Some called her Doc, others, half-jokingly, Night Angel. Zara never acknowledged the nicknames, but she didn't stop them either. Because names didn't matter, actions did. One night, Chief Thompson found her sitting outside the ward again, watching the desert stars flicker beyond the perimeter lights. You know, he said, lowering himself beside her. Command, recommending you for a commendation. She shook her head. I don't want medals, Chief, just better medics. He smiled. You're getting both. They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the low hum of generators, the sound of life continuing after almost ending. Finally, Thompson said, they rebuilt the comms tower today, the last piece destroyed in the attack. Good, Zara murmured. Then Falcon's whole again. Not quite, he said softly, but closer. She nodded. In the distance, she could hear soldiers laughing, tired, relieved, alive. It sounded almost normal. Almost. Later that night, when the ward lights dimmed and the base quieted, Zara walked the corridors alone. The walls smelled of new paint and disinfectant. She passed the same windows where she'd once seen fire raining from the sky. She paused, looking out into the desert, the same horizon, but a different world. Once she'd been a shadow meant to disappear. Now she was something else, visible, fallible, human. The rifle she'd used that night sat locked away in the armory, tagged for evidence. But she could still feel its weight in her hands, and she wondered if it happened again, would she do it all the same? Her answer came as a whisper. Yes. Because saving lives sometimes meant taking them. And that was the part of herself she'd spent years trying to deny. The part that understood that mercy and violence can be two halves of the same heartbeat. She closed her eyes and let the silence settle. Somewhere in the distance, an engine started, a patrol returning. The night continued. And so did she. How do you teach peace when everything you've ever learned came from war? That was the question that followed Zara Hayes everywhere she went in the weeks after the attack. Forward Operating Base Falcon was no longer the same place. The walls had been rebuilt, the fires put out, but the people, they carried something invisible now, a new kind of alertness, a quiet respect for the night shift. The soldiers still called her Doc, though some whispered another name behind it, Night Angel 6. She never confirmed or denied it. Legends were convenient. They made people feel safer. But she wasn't a legend. Not to herself. She was just a woman who'd done what needed to be done and who still woke some nights to the echo of gunfire in her dreams. It started with a simple request from Chief Thompson. He found her one morning in the ward, checking vitals on a post-op Marine. Command approved the training program, he said. They want it up and running by next week. Zara raised an eyebrow. Already. He shrugged. Apparently, word travels fast when a nurse holds off an entire assault. She gave a faint, humorless smile. Guess we start with the basics. Thompson nodded. Make it real, Hayes. None of the PowerPoint nonsense. They need what you know, the real stuff. I only know one way to teach, she said quietly. The way I learned. The first class gathered in the rebuilt motor pool, a wide, empty space turned temporary training arena. 20 medics, soldiers, and volunteers stood waiting. Among them were familiar faces: Martinez, Foster, Mitchell, and Carter. Carter gave her an encouraging nod. Martinez looked uneasy, hands clasped behind his back. Foster whispered something to Mitchell, probably a bet about how long this would last. Zara stood before them, dressed in fatigues without insignia, sleeves rolled, hair tied back. No rank, no title, just presence. Most of you know me, she began. Some of you think you do. A few exchanged nervous glances. What happened 2 weeks ago wasn't luck, she continued. It wasn't heroism either. It was training and discipline and preparation. You don't rise to the occasion, you fall to your level of training. And some of you, she paused, eyes sweeping the room, had no idea how far you could fall until it happened. The silence was heavy but necessary. We're going to fix that. She moved to a whiteboard propped against the wall. On it, she'd written 2 words, survive and save. These are your only missions, she said. Survive long enough to save someone else. Everything we do starts here. Then she erased both words with a gloved hand, leaving the board blank. Because in the dark, when the shooting starts, you won't have time to remember words. You'll only have instincts, and instincts are trained. For the next 2 hours, she tore down everything they thought they knew. They learned how to treat under fire, move patients while shooting, improvise when supplies ran out. They learned that medicine wasn't about clean gloves and perfect light. It was about blood, dirt, pressure, and time. Zara moved among them like a conductor, correcting grip, repositioning stance, demonstrating tourniquet application with one hand while lying prone. When one soldier hesitated to apply pressure to a simulated wound, she snapped, "You think the enemy cares how gentle you are? Press harder." The soldier obeyed, startled, then watched as the bleeding simulation stopped. "See, that's what saves lives," she said softly. "Not hope, not hesitation, action." By the end of the day, no one was laughing. Even Martinez looked changed, stripped of pride, replaced by focus. When the session ended, he approached her, sweat streaking his face. "Where'd you learn to teach like that?" She shrugged. "By watching people die when they didn't know what to do." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll learn fast." Days turned into weeks. The classes grew larger. Word spread through the base that the night shift nurse who'd fought through the siege was training soldiers to survive the next one. Command called it tactical medical readiness. The soldiers called it Hayes School. Every night under floodlights, they practiced scenarios: incoming fire, mass casualty drills, blackout evacuations. Zara built chaos into the training. Alarms blared, smoke filled the air, instructors shouted. Because the enemy never gave warnings, and neither would she. Yet beneath her harsh tone, something changed in Zara. For the first time in years, she wasn't fighting alone. She was building something, a legacy that might outlive her. Carter noticed it first. "You look different," he said one night after training. She raised an eyebrow, older. He smiled faintly, calmer. She chuckled. "Maybe exhaustion looks like calm now." "No," he said softly, "it's purpose." She didn't reply, but his words lingered long after he left. Purpose. The one thing she'd been running from since she left the Black Ops world. Maybe this was it. Maybe teaching others how to survive was her penance. A month after the attack, Colonel Marshall visited the training field unannounced. She watched quietly from the sidelines as Zara ran the drill, 3 teams evacuating a mock casualty under simulated mortar fire. Smoke grenades hissed, soldiers shouted, gunfire cracked from training rounds. When the exercise ended, Marshall stepped forward. "Impressive," she said. "You've turned chaos into a classroom." "Chaos teaches faster than lectures," Zara replied. The colonel nodded. "Command's noticed. They're considering expanding your program to other forward bases." Zara paused. "That's not what I signed up for." "No," Marshall agreed, "but sometimes the mission finds you." For a long moment, they just stood there, 2 soldiers shaped by different kinds of war. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am?" Zara asked. "Always. Last month I broke every rule in the book. If I died out there, it would have been easier for everyone to explain. Instead, I lived. And now everyone wants to turn it into doctrine." Marshall studied her face. "You think that's wrong?" "I think war shouldn't need heroes," Zara said quietly. "It should need fewer casualties." Marshall nodded slowly. "That's exactly why we need you teaching this." Zara didn't answer. But when the colonel left, she found herself staring at the empty field, realizing that maybe, just maybe, this was the mission she hadn't known she needed. That night under a quiet sky, Zara sat outside the ward again. The desert air had cooled, carrying traces of dust and diesel. Carter joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee that smelled more like burnt oil than caffeine. "You think they'll listen?" he asked, settling beside her. "They already are," she said. "Yeah, but up the chain. Command never listens until it's too late. She smiled faintly. Then we keep teaching anyway. He looked at her for a long moment. You ever think about going back to the unit? She took a slow sip before answering, no. Why not? Because I've seen what happens to people who never stop fighting. They forget what they were fighting for. Carter nodded quietly. You think you can forget it? She looked out at the horizon, faint lights marking distant patrols. No, she whispered, but maybe I can make it mean something. By the end of the second month, Falcon felt different. The soldiers walked a little taller. The medics moved faster. The laughter in the chow hall was louder. Resilience had replaced complacency. And in that transformation, Zara found a fragile kind of peace. Thompson called her into his office one afternoon. You've done something rare here, Hayes, he said, handing her a sealed folder. She glanced at it. Transfer orders. He nodded. Fort Sam Houston, instructor position, permanent. She stared at the folder, silent. Command wants you training the next generation of combat medics. Everything you've been teaching here, scaled up, formalized. She placed the folder on his desk without opening it. I don't know if I'm the right person for that, Chief. He smiled. You're exactly the right person. You've been there, you've bled for it. You've seen what happens when preparation meets reality. They need that. She looked away, swallowing hard. I'll think about it. Take your time, he said softly, but you already know the answer. That night she walked the perimeter alone. The desert stretched endless and silent. Every breeze carried a memory of gunfire, of voices, of the night she became what she swore she'd never be again. She stopped near the rebuilt fuel depot, the same place where the first rocket had struck. The sand was smooth now, but she could still see it as it had been. Flames, screaming, chaos. She knelt, running her fingers through the cool dirt. You keep coming back here, a voice said behind her. It was Carter again, his footsteps soft on the sand. Habit, she replied. You don't walk away from where everything changed. He nodded, thinking about the offer. She didn't answer right away. The wind shifted, carrying the faint hum of a generator from the base. I spent years being invisible, she said finally. Then one night I thought being seen would fix something. It didn't. It just reminded me how much it costs to matter. Carter stood beside her in silence. You know what the hardest part of all this is, she asked. Not the killing, not the surviving, it's having to teach people how to prepare for both. He looked at her gently. Then maybe that's the point. If you can make them ready, maybe someday nobody else has to live what you did. Zara smiled faintly. You always sound like you belong in the chaplain's tent. He chuckled. Just a corpsman who's seen too many miracles to believe in luck. They stood there a while longer, the desert wind cool against their faces. Finally, Zara whispered, almost to herself, maybe teaching is just another kind of fight, one that saves lives before the bullets start. Carter nodded. Then it's the best kind. When she returned to the ward, she paused at the door, watching her team work, Foster and Mitchell checking IV lines, Martinez reviewing charts, Thompson reading reports. It looked normal. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to breathe easy. The war might never end out there, but in here, in this small corner of the world, something had changed. And for Zara Hayes, that was enough. What does a warrior do when the war finally stops asking for her? That question haunted Zara Hayes more than the gunfire ever did. Weeks had turned into months since the siege of Falcon Base. The desert had gone back to being quiet, unnervingly quiet. No more rockets, no alarms, just the hum of generators and the distant rhythm of boots on patrol. The base had healed in its own way. Walls rebuilt, routines restored, laughter returning in pieces. But some things, the invisible ones, didn't heal so easily. Zara still walked the compound every night, not because she had to, because she couldn't stop. Old habits don't fade, they just hide behind purpose. It was late, nearly midnight, when Chief Thompson found her outside the new medical ward. She was leaning against the wall, looking up at the floodlights glowing against a sky that never seemed completely dark. He held up 2 mugs of coffee, still awake. "Still here," she said, taking one. "You could have taken that instructor post a month ago," he said gently. "I know. So what's keeping you?" She looked down at the mug, steam curling in the dry air. "Maybe I'm not ready to stop being useful." Thompson chuckled. "You think teaching isn't useful. I think teaching means standing still, and I've been running most of my life." He nodded slowly. "You ever wonder if maybe it's okay to stop running?" She didn't answer, but her silence was enough. The next morning the day shift came in early. The new recruits, kids mostly, some barely 20s, saluted her with quiet respect. To them, she was legend and rumor rolled into one. "Morning Staff Sergeant," one of them said, voice too eager. She smiled faintly. "Just Zara when we're in the ward." They exchanged looks. You could always tell who was new by how surprised they were that the stories were real, that the woman who ran night shift calmly checking IVs was the same one who'd held off an entire assault. But to Zara, it wasn't a story. It was just a night she'd rather forget. That evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, she found herself in the motor pool, where the training drills had once filled the air with shouts and gunfire simulations. Now it was quiet, empty. Martinez approached, his uniform cleaner than she'd ever seen it. He was holding a tablet. "New rotation orders came through," he said. "They're pulling some of us back to Kuwait, including me." She nodded. "You've earned it." He hesitated, then added, "Before I go, I wanted to say thank you for not giving up on us." She looked at him, a faint warmth in her expression. "You gave me a reason not to." He smiled, almost shy. "Still running the drills. Every week, even when you're gone." He saluted, not regulation, not stiff, just honest. Then he walked away. Zara watched him disappear into the sunset, feeling something strange, pride maybe, or something that felt close enough to it. Later that night, she was alone in the ward when she heard soft footsteps. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked without turning. Carter leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You're one to talk." "I'm working." "You're avoiding." She smirked. "Is that an official medical opinion?" He walked in, sitting across from her on an empty cot. "You've been avoiding the transfer. Every time the paperwork comes up, you find an excuse to fix another problem. The power grid, the trauma kits, the training modules. You even rewrote the IV protocols." "Someone has to," she said quietly. "You don't have to fix everything to make staying feel right." Zara looked at him. "You think I'm scared to leave?" He met her gaze. "I think you're scared of who you'll be when you do." That hit harder than he meant it to. She set the clipboard down. "You ever notice," she said after a moment, "how war gives you clarity? You know exactly what to do, what matters, what doesn't, but peace." She exhaled. "Peace is confusing." Carter nodded slowly. "Maybe that's the point." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence only people who have seen chaos can appreciate. Finally she said, "You ever think about leaving?" He shrugged. "Every day, and every day I find another reason not to." "Maybe that's just who we are," she said softly. "The ones who stay behind to make sure the next fight goes better than the last." A few days later, the supply convoy arrived with it, a letter marked confidential, immediate attention. Chief Thompson handed it to her. "It's from Chen." Zara raised an eyebrow. "The DIA suit." "The same, says he's passing through in 72 hours. Wants a word." She sighed. "Of course he does." When Robert Chen arrived, the base seemed smaller somehow, like it didn't fit around his clean shoes and pressed shirt. He found Zara in the mess hall, sitting alone with a notebook. "Staff Sergeant Hayes," he greeted, taking a seat without invitation. "You look well." "Define well," she said dryly. "Alive," he replied. "That's enough." She closed the notebook. "What do you want, Chen?" "An update," he said simply. "Washington's interested in your training program. Word spreading fast, bases are requesting the curriculum. They're calling it the Hayes Protocol." Zara frowned. "I didn't write it to have my name on it." He smiled thinly. "No one ever does." There was a pause, long, heavy, filled with unspoken history. Then Chen leaned forward. "You could come back, not field work, instructional, advisory, help shape doctrine. You'd have access to resources, personnel, the kind of reach that actually changes things." Zara stared at him for a long moment. "You mean go back into the system that built people like me and broke them just as fast?" "Systems evolve when the right people stay in them." "And they die when the wrong people do," she countered. Chen studied her. "You really want to spend the rest of your career here, patching wounds in the dark?" Zara smiled faintly. "If it keeps people alive, yes." He sighed. You always were terrible at politics." "Good thing I'm not running for office." He chuckled, rare, genuine. "I'll make it simple. The offer stands. You'd have rank, authority, and a voice that carries. If you say no, I won't ask again." Zara looked at him. "Then don't." Chen's expression softened slightly. "You're exactly what they need, Hayes. You just don't see it." She leaned back. "I used to think being needed was the same as being valued. It's not. It just means they haven't figured out how to replace you yet." He stood slowly. "You're still impossible." "Still alive, too," she said. Chen nodded once. "For what it's worth, that night in Falcon will be studied for years. Even classified, it's legend in the right circles." Zara's tone turned cold. "Legends get people killed, Chen. They make them think survival's about glory. It's not. It's about doing what hurts and living with it." He hesitated, then said quietly, "I'll tell them you declined." "Good." And just like that, he was gone, another ghost returning to the world of sealed doors and classified files. That night a storm rolled in, rare for the desert, a slow-building wall of sand and lightning. Zara stood outside the ward, wind whipping at her uniform, the air electric. Carter joined her, shielding his face. "Looks like a big one." "Good," she said. "Let the desert breathe a little." He glanced at her, voice raised over the wind. "You ever think you'll leave this place?" She smiled faintly. "You ever think the desert leaves you?" The storm hit full force, sand curling like smoke, thunder rolling across the flat earth. And for the first time in months she laughed. Not bitterly, not wearily. Just freely. Carter looked at her, surprised. "That's new." She shrugged, still smiling. "Guess I'm learning to live with the quiet." When the storm passed, the air smelled like rain and dust, rare perfume in a place that seldom knew either. The next morning she found Thompson in his office, filling out reports. "I'm taking the Fort Sam offer," she said. He looked up slowly, a knowing smile already forming. "Good. I'll finish this rotation, train the replacements, then go." He nodded. "They'll be lucky to have you." She gave a small smile. "We'll see if they agree." As she turned to leave, he said softly, "You did good, Hayes. You gave this place something it didn't know it needed." She paused at the doorway. "What's that?" "Faith." Her expression softened. "You sure you're not confusing me with the chaplain?" He chuckled. "I know the difference. Faith is what you build when everything else burns down." She nodded, eyes distant. "Then maybe that's what Falcon taught me." That night she walked the perimeter one last time, her ritual. The base slept quietly behind her. The stars burned sharp above the desert, unbothered by human wars. At the far end of the compound, she stopped near the rebuilt fuel depot, the place where it had all begun. She knelt, running a gloved hand across the rough concrete. "Still here," she whispered. The air was cool, the kind of quiet that carried memory. And in that stillness, she realized something she hadn't been able to admit. The nurse and the operator weren't two different people. They never had been. They were both her. The healer who saved lives. The soldier who ended threats. The woman who chose both and paid for it in silence. Zara stood, brushing sand from her knee. Somewhere behind her the generators hummed. Life went on. And as she turned toward the lights of the base, toward the place she'd saved, and the people who'd finally seen her, she smiled. Because sometimes redemption doesn't come with medals or headlines. Sometimes it's just a quiet night, a steady heart, and the knowledge that you've left the world a little stronger than you found it. What happens to a soldier when the gunfire stops, but the echoes do? Zara Hayes asked herself that question every morning she woke up in her new world, Fort Sam Houston. Gone were the sandstorms, the floodlights, the desert nights that hummed with tension. Here the air smelled of rain and cut grass. Cadets marched in perfect rows. The sky wasn't a threat anymore, it was just blue. She was an instructor now. Lead medical trainer, Tactical Operations Division. That's what the badge said on her uniform. But titles didn't mean much to Zara. What mattered were the faces, young, untested, full of the same fire she'd once carried before the world had shown her what fire really does. The classroom was a converted hangar. Rows of new recruits sat in crisp fatigues, notebooks open, pens ready. Zara walked in with the same quiet authority she'd had in Falcon, no need to shout. Her silence carried weight. "Good morning," she began, voice calm, even. "If you're here, it means you volunteered to become combat medics. That's noble. It's also dangerous. You'll see the best and worst of humanity, often in the same minute." A few recruits shifted uneasily. One raised his hand. "Ma'am, is it true you served at Falcon Base during the siege?" Zara's eyes flicked toward him, not annoyed, not proud, just steady. "Yes." Another voice spoke up, hesitant. "And that you fought back, alone." A quiet ripple went through the room. She let the silence hang, then said simply, "No one fights alone, not really." That was all she gave them. No details, no glorified stories. Because the truth wasn't a legend, it was a scar, and she carried enough of those already. In the weeks that followed, she shaped them the way the desert had shaped her, through realism, repetition, and brutal honesty. They learned how to think under fire, how to save lives in chaos, how to choose who to treat when time runs out. Her motto was written on the whiteboard every morning. Calm is contagious. When cadets faltered, she didn't shout. She'd just say, "Again." They learned to move faster, steadier, quieter. And slowly she began to see herself in them. The raw courage, the naive belief that skill could outrun loss. She didn't try to take that belief away. She just taught them how to live long enough to keep it. One evening, after a long training day, Zara stayed behind to clean up the simulation area. A young cadet, Private Hannah Lewis, approached hesitantly. 19, maybe 20, eyes bright, hands trembling slightly. "Ma'am," she asked, "can I ask something personal?" Zara looked up. "You just did." Lewis smiled nervously. "Right, I wanted to know how you decide, who to save first." Zara paused, wiping blood-colored dye off her gloves. "You mean when there's more than one?" The girl nodded. Zara set the rag down. "You don't decide who to save, you decide who can't die yet." Lewis frowned, confused. Zara continued softly, "Out there you'll see faces you can't forget. People begging, bleeding, praying. You'll want to help everyone, but you won't. You can't. So you learn to save the ones who still have time. That's how you live with yourself afterward." Lewis swallowed hard. "And if you guess wrong?" Zara's eyes drifted for a moment far away, somewhere between memory and regret. "Then you carry them, for a while, maybe forever, but you keep walking." The young cadet didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The lesson had already sunk deeper than words could reach. By the end of her first month, Zara's class ranked top in every category. They were faster, sharper, calmer under pressure. But something about that success felt bittersweet. Every time a recruit graduated, she saw another face she'd one day worry about, faces too young to know what real war sounds like. And yet, every graduation ceremony reminded her why she'd come here. It wasn't to escape the past. It was to pass it forward without letting it destroy the next generation. One afternoon, she received a message marked priority. It was from Colonel Jennifer Marshall, Falcon Base. Zara opened it. Subject: Progress Report. Message: Base secure. Training implemented successfully. No incidents since the last attack. Recruits still quote your words. Thought you'd want to know. The night shift drill is now standard procedure. We call it the Hayes rotation. Zara stared at the message, feeling something shift in her chest, not pride exactly. Something quieter, something like peace. She typed her reply slowly. Response: Tell them I'm proud. Not of me, of them. Keep the lights low and the courage steady. Z. Hayes. She hesitated before hitting send, then smiled. That'll do, she whispered. That night, she walked across the training field alone. The air was warm, cicadas humming softly. The stars weren't hidden by dust anymore. And yet, she missed the desert sometimes. Not the danger, the simplicity. The way every decision there had meant something immediate. Here, the silence was different. It wasn't threatening, it was reflective. But reflection, she was learning, could be just as hard as combat. The following week, a visiting officer observed her class, none other than Robert Chen. When she saw him step through the doorway, clipboard in hand, she almost laughed. You really can't stay out of my orbit, can you? She said quietly. He smiled. Call it professional curiosity. I wanted to see what you built. The cadets didn't know who he was, but they could feel the tension in the air. Zara led the drill anyway. Under fake gunfire and blaring sirens, the recruits performed flawlessly. No panic, no hesitation, just focus. When it ended, Chen approached, slow clapping once. Impressive. Zara wiped her hands on a towel. You didn't come to flatter me. He nodded. You're right. I came to tell you they're expanding the program. Hayes protocol's going international. Allied forces are adopting it. She blinked. You're serious. As a bullet wound, he said. Your method's the calm under chaos, the no-rank training environment, it's changing doctrine. The brass hates that it works. Zara smiled faintly. Good, maybe they'll learn something. Chen looked at her for a long moment. You know you could lead the program, global command, travel, resources, autonomy. She shook her head. I've had enough of command. These are my people right here. He studied her expression, and then, for the first time, he didn't argue. He just nodded. Then keep doing what you do. You're rewriting the manual one heartbeat at a time. As he turned to leave, she called out, Chen. He looked back. Thank you, she said softly. For a brief moment, he smiled, genuine, unguarded. Don't thank me. Just keep proving why we needed you in the first place. After he left, Zara stood alone in the empty hangar, hands in her pockets. Outside, cadets jogged in the distance. Their voices carried on the wind, young, hopeful, loud. And she realized something. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a ghost among the living. She was part of something again, something that didn't demand silence or blood or hiding. Just truth. A few nights later, Private Lewis knocked on her door again, this time not nervous but excited. Ma'am, she said, holding a folded letter. Deployment orders, I ship out next week. Zara took the letter gently, reading the header, Falcon Base, Iraq. Her heart gave a small, painful thud. Lewis smiled nervously. You served there, right? Any advice? Zara looked at her for a long moment. Then she placed a steady hand on the young woman's shoulder. Listen more than you talk. Respect the night shift. Trust your team. And remember, courage doesn't mean not being afraid. It means doing what's right while you're terrified. Lewis nodded, eyes bright. Yes, ma'am. As she turned to go, Zara added quietly, and one more thing, when it's over, come back. Don't stay too long in the noise. The girl smiled. I will. When she left, Zara sat down slowly, exhaling. The circle had closed, one soldier leaving to stand where she once had. But this time, the base would be ready. A week later, during evening drills, Zara watched the sunset fade behind the training field. The recruits packed up, laughing, exhausted. She stood there long after they were gone, the sky shifting from gold to violet to deep, endless blue. In that quiet, she thought about all the versions of herself she'd been: the medic, the operative, the nurse, the teacher. Each one had fought a different kind of battle. Each one had survived for a reason. And maybe, finally, she understood what that reason was. Not glory. Not redemption. Just continuity. The passing of strength from one heart to another. She smiled softly. Somewhere in the dark, the sound of boots echoed, a night patrol changing shift. And the phrase she'd once told her students came back to her, whispered through memory. Calm is contagious. It wasn't just a lesson, it was her legacy. When you spend long enough in war, peace starts to sound unfamiliar. Too quiet, too soft, too forgiving. But one morning, standing in the sunlight outside the training field, Zara Hayes realized maybe peace wasn't the absence of noise. Maybe it was the courage to stop listening for gunfire. Fort Sam Houston moved around her like clockwork, cadets jogging, orders shouted, engines humming from distant hangars. It was routine, predictable, safe. And yet she still found herself scanning rooftops, checking angles, listening for echoes that weren't there. Old instincts die slow. She'd been at Fort Sam for almost a year. Her program, the Hayes Protocol, had spread to every major base across 2 continents. New medics carried her methods like gospel. Somewhere, soldiers were alive because of lessons she'd whispered into the dust of the desert. But Zara never saw it as legacy. She saw it as survival passed on, multiplied, refined. It was early spring when the letter came. Hand-delivered by courier, no digital trace marked from Falcon Base. She recognized the handwriting before she opened it. Colonel Marshall. She sat at her desk, the world quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock. The envelope was thick, slightly worn from travel. Inside was a folded note and a small photograph. The photo showed a group of medics, faces she half recognized, standing under the rebuilt tower at Falcon. And in the middle, holding the same flag she once treated under fire, was Private Hannah Lewis. Zara smiled softly. Lewis looked confident, strong, alive. The note was short, handwritten in blue ink. Zara, thought you'd want to know your student saved 6 lives last week during a convoy ambush. She quoted you during triage. You don't choose who to save. You choose who can't die yet. The Hayes rotation saved them all. You'd have been proud. Marshall. Zara read it twice. Then again. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself cry. Not because of grief, but because the words meant she'd finally done what every soldier hopes to do. Leave behind something that outlasts the sound of their name. That night she walked through the quiet campus. The air smelled of cedar and rain. Streetlights cut long shadows across the pavement. She could hear cadets laughing somewhere in the dorms, young voices untouched by what the world could do to them. She found herself standing at the flagpole in the center courtyard, the same flag she once fought beneath, its edges frayed by wind and weather. And she thought about Falcon, about Carter, Thompson, Martinez, the chaos, the silence after. About the woman she used to be, the one who thought hiding was healing. She wasn't that woman anymore. Falcon had burned it out of her. Now she was something simpler. A teacher. A survivor. A quiet soldier who fought a different kind of battle against forgetting. A few days later, she was invited to speak at a graduation ceremony, her first public appearance since leaving the field. The auditorium was packed with cadets, officers, family members. Flags lined the walls. Zara stood at the podium, uniform crisp, medals minimal, just one silver bar that caught the light when she moved. She waited until the room fell silent. "When I joined the military," she began softly, "I thought courage meant being fearless. I was wrong." Her voice was low, steady, the kind of voice that made people lean forward. Fear never leaves you. It just becomes something you learn to carry. Courage isn't what you show others. It's what you whisper to yourself when no one's left to listen. The room was utterly still. "I spent years thinking I had to choose between being a healer and being a soldier," she continued. "Then one night, in the middle of chaos, I realized they're the same thing. Both mean putting someone else's life before your own." A cadet in the front row blinked back tears. "So if you take anything from this program from me, let it be this. You will see pain, you will feel it, you will lose people. But you will also save them. Sometimes with your hands, sometimes with your presence, sometimes just by refusing to give up." Her voice softened. "And when it's over, when the dust settles and the silence comes, don't run from it. Learn to live in it. That's where peace hides." For a moment, no one moved. Then the applause began, hesitant at first, then rising like a wave. Zara didn't bow. She just nodded once, stepped back, and let the sound wash over her like rain after a long drought. That evening, as the sun set behind the base, Zara found herself walking the perimeter, old habit she'd never fully broken. The sky was painted gold and violet, streaks of color melting into the horizon. Carter had transferred months ago, back into field work. Thompson had retired quietly. Falcon Base had turned into a training hub now, its scars transformed into lessons. Zara paused near the edge of the training grounds. The air smelled faintly of oil and fresh grass. She knelt, tracing a finger through the dirt. "Still standing," she murmured. A voice behind her said, "And still teaching." She turned. It was Lewis, back from deployment, uniform dusty, eyes older than before. "Permission to visit, ma'am." Zara smiled. "Always." Lewis walked up, holding something small, a patch dark green and worn. "I brought this from Falcon," she said. "They retired the old call sign after the attack. Thought you should have it." Zara took it gently. It read, "Night Watch 6." She stared at it for a long time, thumb brushing the faded stitching. "Thank you," she whispered. Lewis hesitated. "You once said peace is confusing. Do you still think that?" Zara looked out at the horizon, the last light fading over Texas. "Sometimes, but maybe confusion's just another kind of healing." Lewis smiled faintly. "It suits you." They stood in silence for a moment, the air cooling around them. Then Zara said, "Go get some rest, soldier, you've earned it." Lewis saluted, turned, and walked away. Zara watched her go, not as a student, but as proof that the world could still rebuild itself, one heartbeat at a time. That night, alone in her quarters, Zara placed the patch on her desk beside the photograph from Falcon. Two symbols, one of what she'd survived, one of what she'd saved. She sat for a long time, the hum of the night settling around her. And as she closed her eyes, she saw it all, the flash of the desert sky, the roar of explosions, the faces of the ones she couldn't save and the ones she did. They didn't haunt her anymore. They just existed. Part of her always would be. Months later, she would retire quietly, no ceremony, no speech. Just a final salute, a folded uniform, and a letter recommending her program's expansion to every major training center in the world. She would spend her days walking near the river, helping at veterans' clinics, teaching first aid to kids at community centers. And sometimes, when people asked who she used to be, she'd smile and say, "Just a nurse." Because that was enough. Years later, long after her story had turned into whispers and history books, a young medic in some faraway base would hear the name Zara Hayes mentioned in passing. They ask who was she, and someone older, maybe a commander, maybe a survivor, would say softly, "She was the one who taught us that saving lives isn't about rank or medals. It's about standing your ground when everything else falls apart." And maybe that's all legacy really is, not the noise you leave behind, but the quiet you teach others to hold. The night shift never truly ends. It just passes from one soul to the next, each learning that strength isn't loud, courage isn't showy, and peace doesn't come from victory. It comes from endurance. And if you listen closely, under the hum of the world, you can still hear her voice, steady, calm, unbroken. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.